Next In.
Welcome to Next In, and I'm happy to introduce you to Phil Carpenter, the Chief Marketing Officer for Alice Technologies.
Hi,
How are you
good to
doing
meet
today?
you.
Nice to meet you as well, man. How's the day been? California right now,
It's
correct?
good. Santa Barbara is a nice place to be on a Friday afternoon before Labor Day.
So, fun fact: I was supposed to go to the University of Santa Barbara on a full ride wrestling scholarship, and lost it because I got ran over by a car. But there was a point in time where Santa Barbara was supposed to be home for a hot second.
Wow.
Never made it. Stayed it in the Pacific Northwest. Sunshine wasn't meant for me. Apparently, I was supposed to stay in the rain.
Hey, I'm a Pacific Northwest fan too. I have family up there and really enjoy it. So you're in a good part of the world as well.
What part of the Pacific Northwest is the family?
So my younger brother lives in Portland, and
Okay.
my parents lived in the Eugene area for more than 25 years.
Okay, so Oregon.
Yes.
Very big difference between Portland and Eugene. One is farms, one is city.
Yes. Yeah. Culturally super different, politically different, everything. But both fun.
Yeah. In between, you could go to Nike and go for a run.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So, Phil, today my goal is to get to know your story, man. Like, how did you get to where you are? You're the chief marketing officer of a construction technology company that's booming. It's doing awesome. Want to hear some of that. But one of the things that I want to start with today is like every single leader has like an origin story of some kind, right? So, can you share us a pivotal moment early in your career where you realized you were A, destined for leadership, and B, you decided marketing was my path?
Let's start with the marketing piece. And that I learned pretty early on. So my very first job was as the marketing guy for a little startup, all of 12 people. I mean, I was the marketing department, right? It was me. Um, and it was a small B2B software company. And I got to do everything because, I was the only person. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I'm a storyteller at heart. I was an English major as an undergraduate. Uh, and the idea that there were all of these people out there who needed to understand what we did, how we did it, why our product was a good match for them, um, really got me excited. Like, how do I tell the story to convince them to try us and ultimately to buy us? And I felt and still feel that um, communication is often a shortcoming in tech. People don't do it well. So if you have that skill and you can bring it to the market, I think you're distinctive. And that's really what uh, got me turned on to marketing. What I realized I didn't know at that point was as much about business as a whole as I wanted. So I spent several years doing this and ultimately went back to Harvard and got an MBA. And I kind of filled in the gaps to help me understand the way that businesses ran, more holistically.
Yeah, and you've had like a really interesting career. You went from startups, you did enterprise companies, you've done a little bit of different things in between where it was like marketing, products, etc. What would you say are the two biggest differences between your time at like some of the startups versus some of the enterprise companies that you were at?
Yeah, I would sort of break the career down into two buckets. One was principally startup land, and two was the marketing agency world, right? So I spent 12 years actually kind of in the middle of my career at two different marketing and PR agencies
Yep.
as an agency leader, helping to run multiple offices, helping to bring in new business, and of course, helping to make clients happy. What I liked about that world was that you were focused on a core set of elements, right? It was all about executing in marketing in a very kind of well-defined area. Now, you had clients who were in lots of different businesses. I worked on Orbitz, the online travel company. I worked on Best Western Hotels. I worked on Toyota, right? So I've done all sorts of different kinds of businesses, but it's been all about marketing and marketing communications. Um, and then what I particularly liked, as a senior person in the agency world, you're running a business. I mean, I had 6 different offices that ranged from Seattle in the north all the way to San Diego in the south, and each of them had a general manager who I managed, and their own P&L, and you got to kind of help coach them to run their businesses, which all rolled up into yours. So, as an MBA type, I really liked that.
So let me ask you this: when you had that, you're
Yes,
like, we had a singular focus, a lot of different customers, which
yes,
I can totally understand. So I run a boutique recruiting agency. We're like a white glove service, but at the end of the day, all of our searches, we're headhunters,
yes,
and our goal is to headhunt. So we can recruit anything because it's a headhunting service versus like a quick temp staffing service, which I imagine is very similar to like what you did from on the agency side, where you're like, this is where our KPIs are, this is what we excel at. Marketing happens to be our service, but this is our North Star. This is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. What was that for you for a number of years?
I mean, for in an agency like that, I mean, first of all, the North Star has to be excellent client service. If you're not delivering well for your clients, they're not going to keep you around. But the that excellence was all within public relations, social media, web design, like all of those services that were sort of core to storytelling, right?
Yep.
Um, and the different agencies sort of did it somewhat in different fashions. But I tell you, I loved the agency world for many ways, but I missed being part of a kind of a multifunctional company. Right? I'd done a startup before business school. I had done several startups after business school. Uh, then I kind of defected to the agency world for a while. But I came to miss having around me, the finance people and the engineers and the sales guys and like all of the different functions within a corporation that make it interesting and multifaceted, and I miss that. So ultimately, I returned to startup land with a vengeance, and have been there again through several of them. And I have to say, Shane, I love being in a young company because you have a chance to put your fingerprints on a business. You can define who it is and how it describes itself and how it operates. And as a senior person, um, you're driving, right, the success of that entity, and it succeeds or fails, you know uh, based on the efforts of you and your peers. Um,
Yeah.
and I like that an awful lot. Um, in one of those situations, I actually was fortunate enough to help define a category. So a couple friends and I created what would now be referred to as the travel search engine category. So we launched a company called Sidestep, which was the very first of its kind, which searched many, many different sites and brought all that inventory together in one place for you to choose. Ultimately, we were bought for $200 million by Kayak, and Kayak is
In my
probably
head, I was thinking that sounds like you're about to talk about kayak.
yeah. So if you've used that product,
Yeah.
that came from what we started, and we had a great exit, and they went on in turn to sell it to Priceline for I think 1.2 billion. So they did just fine
Decent
too.
penny.
Yeah, and so that was great because again, for a marketing person, it's so creative. There's nothing there, and you get to define it, and I loved that. I didn't think, Shane, that I would have another chance to do that in my career because it's like being struck by lightning twice. Uh, but I
But
have.
it feels like at Alice Technologies, it feels like you might have hit lightning in a bottle twice.
Totally
You
lucky,
might have done it twice.
right? I mean, as a marketer, like I'm so grateful that I have. But now it's totally different business, construction. Think like really big projects, so bridges and airports and oil and gas refineries, big, complicated construction projects. and
And
we
it's
have soft.
still living in a fax machine.
Yeah,
Right? Like it's like that kind of concept. It feels like it sometimes.
they're not the fastest to adopt technology, but I think recently, if the success in the funding of construction technology companies is any signal of this, like there's a lot of attention that's being paid to this area because I think people have realized, look, it's a $12.1 trillion global industries. It just deserves to be disrupted, and there are lots of different facets of it that are ripe for improvement. So we picked one, which is construction scheduling, right? Which you think, oh my gosh, that seems so narrow. Why that? And how can there possibly be much of a business in that? Oh, it's a huge business.
The timing of things, the supply chain of things, the delivery time with multiple vendors not showing up, needing to replace them, and having data that can suggest why you need to replace them. All of that stuff becomes incredibly difficult.
It's so complicated. And then you think about the scale, right? You're building a nuclear power plant, for example. Like, holy smokes, this is a project that will go on for decades and it's dangerous, right? And it's got a ton of people and materials and all that stuff. How can you optimize the schedule to build it faster, to build it better, build it cheaper? Um, how can you maximize or mitigate the risk, right? So
Is somebody breach of contract because scheduling isn't there? And I'm assuming that's a part of like this.
it's a big problem, right? When you're a
Yeah.
general contractor and you miss your deadlines, you can be on the hook and pay, huge damage payments, right, for blowing it. So if you can schedule with greater precision, it's of huge advantage. And we're taking AI and making that possible. And so, yeah, I feel again really fortunate. I am now at the forefront of defining another category, this generative construction scheduling bit that we're pursuing, and it's a lot of fun.
That's incredible. Which some of this is starting to touch base on one of the questions what I wanted to ask, right? Which is like when I look at and I speak to every leader, they face challenges and they face moments of pride, right? One of the things I wanted to ask is if we can discuss one of the most significant obstacles that you faced from when you started marketing to all of a sudden becoming the chief marketing officer. How did you overcome that? And how did that influence your leadership style today?
It's interesting. Um, I think I I think I'm going to point for me. I've always liked to be in a place where the technology is new to the market, new to the consumer, because I feel like that's the hardest and therefore for me the most interesting. And so uh, I've consistently faced challenges associated with being there and helping the various audiences that need to understand what the heck are you doing and why are you doing it and why does it matter to me, right? That is the challenge, the kind of challenge that I like most because I'm very,
So
very,
something that's like early to market, and you're trying to go, how do we attract early adopters, first starter adopters, not late stage adopters? We don't worry about them. But how do we get early stage adopters and be able to grasp that? That's where your passion is.
yeah, and I've done it consistently. I mean, my very first quote unquote internet focused job, which was in 96, which was really early in the advent of the commercial internet, was with a company that was way before your time called Pointcast, which was the very first internet news and information system. There was no such service like that, no news aggregator. Today you think of sort of like Google News, but imagine if back in the day, when your screensaver went on, which they sort of used to do more often than they do today, rather than showing you like an aquarium, right, with little colored fish bopping around, it showed you headlines from CNN, Wall Street Journal, ZDNet, all these sources, and then you click on them, and then boom, you go through to the news source of your choice, right? So a really powerful service before its time in a lot of ways, had to invent everything. Like the desktop technology was new, the client itself, and of course, getting people to download a client is not often easy. The advertising model was new, the ad unit was new. I mean, it's hard, right? To do
Yeah.
everything yourself was more common in those early days of the internet, and Lord knows we did a ton of that. And even though that company didn't work out, it was a fantastic flame out, and the original founder got greedy and could have sold it to Rupert Murdoch for 400 million bucks. Didn't do it. Ended up getting kicked out. New guy came in. He left. The whole thing sold for pennies on the dollar. It was a shame. However, what happens when you have one of those tech supernovae is that they scatter awesome people all over the place. And my
You're like,
professional
it burned down, but ash is nutritious and
it,
it allows for things to grow.
it does indeed. And so I knew so many people that went on to do so many other different things at companies throughout Silicon Valley, which is where I've spent my career.
Yeah.
And what a wonderful network to have. But it came because of a flame out. It came because of destruction, right?
Yeah, it came because of destruction. I was having a conversation with somebody earlier today where, like, sometimes, like, I have my entrepreneurial friends, and we had like a very deep conversation yesterday where it was around how her business was like struggling and failing, and she's getting ready to do this new innovative thing that people have been talking about for a while. And she's like, if I started this 6 months ago, I could have already made $1 million on this one new line of business, but I haven't. I'm going to do it. And one of our conversations was like, sometimes you need the battle scars. Sometimes you need to have your arm chopped off and let it regrow, I guess. If we can do that, if we pretend like we're a lizard where our tails grow back, but we're not, so that doesn't work. But sometimes you need the battle scars, and that allows you to build the next best thing. And you're like, oops, somebody saw and had a vision of something great, but we messed up, but we can iterate and we can learn from that.
I think they're so important. I mean, look, humans learn more from pain than from pleasure. We just do, right? And
Yeah.
it's unfortunately the pain that really drives us to adapt and understand. And then next time you see a situation like that, you're going to handle it all the better. You're like, look, I've been there before, pattern matching. I get it. I'm not going to do that. Now I might make another mistake, right? But I'm not going to make the same one twice. So I have, as a serial startup guy, I've had, companies that have been really successful, and I've had companies that have blown up, and I've had companies that I've worked for that have staggered along, kind of all various flavors. But the ones that have blown up, honestly, are probably the ones that have taught me the most.
Yeah. Agreed. My failed startups are the ones that I feel like gave me the most amount of energy, momentum, learning lessons, foresight, etc., to be able to do better.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
So good.
So one of the questions I was always going to have is like, and you're starting to bring this up, which is you like to be at the forefront, latest and greatest. I like being able to sell stuff that is for early adopters, etc.
Yep.
But the marketing world itself is constantly changing with emerging technologies, consumer behaviors, whatever. What strategies or habits do you have that you've adopted over time to stay ahead of the curve? And how would you advise somebody else out there in the world to use some of the things that you've learned, some of the battle scars that you've had to help you get in front of the learning curve and to be able to adopt new technologies faster that you can implement into your day-to-day habits?
Yeah. I mean, I'd say one thing that's really important is just maintain a curious mind. Read, listen to podcasts, talk to smart people, right? Especially people in domains who probably know their core domain better than you do, right? But keep pushing yourself to learn and understand. Um, that that's exciting to me. Some people might find it overwhelming. I think it's hard and thus cool, right? To have to stay ahead of the curve. Um, I think the other thing that's really important is um, build a test and learn environment, right? Just make sure that everyone around you understands that in marketing we have to try stuff, and we will try stuff that doesn't work. When we do that, we're going to understand why it doesn't work. We're not just going to sort of
You're
throw
like 75% doesn't work,
it.
25 does, and then we spend 80% of our time double downing on that stuff.
You just,
Right?
learn, yeah, learn, and then, have a revised, intensity on the stuff that's performing, but then don't just become complacent. Don't just count on that. Keep trying new things.
Yeah.
One of the things that
What does that testing and experiment environment look like for you? How long do you do it, and how long do you say this isn't working?
so
Cut
I,
bait.
I gosh, I think that the duration of the test totally depends on the medium, right? So
Yep.
there are a lot of things that you can test online where you can know pretty quickly, frankly, whether it's working or not, depending on how you measure what you're measuring. Um, Offline's harder. Offline requires more time. Offline is tougher often to measure.
Yep.
So you need to be more thoughtful about that. So I think that how you evaluate success from your experiments has to include things like
Can you
that.
give me like an example? Like I'll have like the other day we're looking at marketing functions and we were like, okay, so YouTube videos, you got to be able to give it a 2 week lifespan. We can start adopting and figure out within 2 weeks what is our ROI, what is the measurements. For YouTube Shorts, 2 days.
Right, right. Well, so at the extreme, pick traditional direct mail, right? Which you think, wow, that's old school. But guess what? It is still a tool that a lot of companies use and use successfully. I mean, that can take weeks, months, right? To get responses and attribute things the right way, run your numbers and sort of see where you are. And then contrast that with something like AdWords, right? Like you could be constantly fiddling with AdWords based on what you learn and learn pretty quickly. And one of the reasons I really appreciate that kind of environment is you don't have to spend a ton to learn a lot, right? And know, okay, great, this copy is working, these keywords are working, this is not working. I love the fact that you can iterate really fast. You need to have people on it, especially if you're a senior person. You need to have people on it who work for you, whether they're internal or external, who are just immersed in that. But assuming that you do, it's a really wonderful feedback loop, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to do a little bit of a transition, right? And obviously I run a recruiting agency. So like part of what I want to talk about it is like hiring, interviews, what works for you, what doesn't work for you.
Awesome.
Right. And so I've got a lot of people that are constantly trying to get into the marketing world, the marketing field in a variety of different fashions. But, obviously in your role as the chief marketing officer, you're likely deeply involved in the hiring decision process. So there's always this conversation around how do you strike a balance between hiring for culture fit versus hiring for technical fit, especially in a field like marketing where both are obviously crucial. So it's like, are there any experiences that have like reshaped your perspective on how much of your time and energy focused on the technical requirement versus the culture requirement and shaping people up?
Such a good question. Look, I'm going to say both are important. If you don't have the cultural fit, you're not going to last long, even if your skills are high. And I've been in situations where, our company had hired somebody who knew how to do the job and was really good at the job, but was an absolute miss for the collaborative culture that I was working in at the time. He lasted a couple months, and then I remember firing him. He was shocked because he thought he was great,
Yeah.
and he just didn't understand how badly he was missing the mark internally, right? So I think you have to feel like this person is going to work with the rest of the organization, right? It's table stakes and really important.
So
um,
that's a question I want to dive a little bit deeper on, right? Because I have this conversation all the time with other CMOs, COOs, CEOs, whatever, which is I have a top performer. They're crushing it. but culturally, they're crushing it. And it's just like, how do you have that conversation to maybe try to salvage the person? And maybe the answer is you can't salvage them. You just got to exit. It's gangrene and we got to start over. But I'm curious, like your philosophy behind that, where it's like top performer crushing it in the wrong ways and destroying the team.
Yeah.
How do you balance that?
I don't have much patience for that,
You know,
because I think it can do so much damage to an organization and can happen really quickly. Because then other people say, "Oh, well, like Fred got away with that. Maybe I maybe I could be an asshole." Right? Like not okay. So, my feeling is like, look, you have to give a strong, hard early warning. Like, look, you were missing it in these ways. Boom, 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 boom. You have to be really direct, even and tough. Give them and give them a time. Say, like, look, you've got a month to work this out, and if that doesn't work, we're going to be having a really different conversation. um, and then if it doesn't work, you just have to fire them. I mean, full stop. You can't let the gangrene set in, or you're going to lose not just the ankle, you'll lose the whole leg. Right?
yep.
So do
Starts
not.
bleeding into the culture and then they start questioning you and they start asking like, why are you allowing this? You're compromising it for talent. Is that more important than the rest of us? And then it becomes no bueno.
All those things. You're so right, Shane. So again, I don't have much patience for it. And I shake my head when I hear people talk, especially in tech, about passion. And passion is an excuse to behave like a jerk. And look, a workplace is successful when we're all working together. And quite frankly, when we like that experience, right? Because if we like it, we're going to work harder. We're going to have greater commitment to the organization. We're going to
We're going to
stay.
hit deadlines,
Yeah, we'll meet
but
our
we don't
commitments
care if,
or pass them.
you know,
Like, we're going to stay at the company for longer because honestly, we like being there. So, if you let people, even if they're good at their job, behave poorly, it's a recipe for trouble.
yep. And so top performer is gone.
If you
And
need
then we
to,
start interviewing people.
yeah, because, like, look, no one has an irreplaceable skill in this world. Let's be honest, right? No one does. And so, look, you might be temporarily set back by having to, for example, let your top sales guy go. Okay, there are other salespeople in the world who are good, and you will find one, and you will find one who is a better cultural match. And you know what? The organization
And
will.
it'll up level the team.
Yes,
So your people that are bottom and mid performers will rise when you get the better person that helps the collective grow.
and remember that the juniors learn from the seniors, right? So if the seniors are behaving like jerks, that is not the pattern that you want to be learned, right? Not at
Yep.
all. It's like, parenting, like, you have to model the correct behavior that you want for your kids if you expect them to behave like that. It's really true, having raised two kids myself. And
Yep.
and so it carries over to the workplace. It's the same thing, reward the behavior that helps the organization thrive. And if you're seeing bad behavior, get rid of it.
Yeah. And I'm curious of like, cool. So this person has to go. All of a sudden, we have to backfill this role,
Yes.
right? And it's still on the same topic of like skill versus culture. And interviewing is obviously like a science. But can you share maybe like a memorable instance or moment where like an interviewee did something unexpected, but it still convinced you they were the right person for the role? And based on your experiences, what are the key indicators that you look for in a candidate that will help you elicit like this is a green light, yes, let's go, even if they're not necessarily the perfect technical fit?
Yeah. So I have a style of interviewing, Shane, that I'm sure you know well, that I believe in very strongly. And that's what they call behavioral interviewing, right? So
Yep.
can you give me an example of a time when, fill in the blank, right? And I think if you don't do that, what you have is people talking in platitudes, right? Generalizations. But, the rubber meets the road, at hard points in life. And so I'll poke and prod on those, and I'll ask you, give me an example of a time when uh, the project that you were leading failed? What happened? What did you learn? Right?
What if they said, I've never worked on a project that's ever failed? They've
Oh,
been beautiful, magical. The unicorns are running, the rainbows are there. Like,
well,
it's all good.
it's either crap or they're not old enough, right? Because with
Yeah.
enough time, all of us fail, right? We all do.
Failing's good.
Yes.
I love failing. And it's like, I have that conversation with people all the time where it's like, if you're not failing, you're not pushing on the edge. Like, you're not learning, you're not growing, you're being probably safe.
And what is helpful is being in an environment that um, understands the importance of failure and accepts it, like within bounds, right? You can't fail at everything,
Yep.
but you do need to be, as you said, pushing things, pushing the edge, and um, and taking enough risks such that sometimes it doesn't work out. So, back to the interview part, I always do the give me an example of behavioral interviewing style. And I throw a variety of different hypothetical situations at someone and just, give me the scoop, right? That's what I want. I want to see that they have skills, but I also want to see that they have the flexibility to handle stuff when it doesn't go right.
So,
Because,
like, let me ask you this,
yeah.
Phil. When
Mhm.
you've, in a past, can
Yes.
you give me an example of when you worked on a project and it failed? How did you learn from it and how did you grow? Like, what would be like a
Mm.
model example that you could give that people can hear where it's vulnerable enough where you're like, that's a solid answer. That's my guy. That's exactly what I want on this team.
Yeah. So I'll tell you. Um, at one of the startups I was working, amongst the things that I was really deeply involved with, um, was the day-to-day management of search engine marketing, which is a very quantitative field, right?
Mhm.
And I'm not inherently a strongly quant guy. It's not what I do best. And so, in any case, I was doing this amongst a bunch of other things that I was responsible for because again, I was running an entire department. And I realized, and I think our CEO did too, that this was not my forte, right? And so together we had a really honest conversation like, look, Phil, you're not the person to run this. And he brought in another person to do it. And that person was good. That person was super anal retentive. Oh my God. But it is
As one that can crunch numbers is.
yeah, but look, that was exactly the right person to fill that role, and he did well, right? And so I think big lesson for me in that is really understand where your core competencies lie. Be honest about that, what you're good at, what you're not good at, and really try to double down on the stuff in your career and in your life um, where it just seems you have an abundance of talent, right? Because I think what's going to happen is you're going to do well, you're going to like that you've done well, and it's going to be this reinforcing circle, right? You're going to do better, you're going to grow, and so forth and so on. But if you try to stick square peg in round hole, it's not going to last long, and you won't be happy. You really won't. I mean, maybe
So you
you're.
realize I'm not the data guy, but I can do strategy. I can do creative. I can do copy. I can do content. Like that stuff, I'm going to rock. But once it's the data and the measurements and like where are we placing ads? How are we placing ads? How do we make decisions on KPIs? How do we look at investments? Not me. Somebody else can balance that while I do the other stuff that can help us generate creative.
I'm happy running that function, right, as being the person to whom the junior person reports because I have strong general management skills and I am good at running that person and helping him or her to, really focus on the right things and be successful in his or her career. But that's not me, right?
Yep.
And that was an important realization for me. And I think honestly, the older you get, the more comfortable you are in your own skin, the more honest you are with you and those around you about what you're great at, where your superpowers are, and what's not your thing.
Yeah.
And I think people are really appreciative of your honesty when you talk about those things.
Yeah, really early on, one of the things that I really valued is I wrestled for a number of years. So earlier on, I said I was supposed to go to the University of Santa Barbara, specifically for wrestling.
Yes.
And one of the things that I learned in wrestling is, especially if like somebody that's like a gold medalist, they've got 3 good moves. Most of them are just, they've got 3 moves and that's it.
Yes.
And what's crazy, especially like the Olympic gold medalists, they have 3 good moves. Everybody in the freaking world knows who they are. And when you're getting ready to go against them, your goal is like, how do I win? How do I beat this guy or lady? How this person? Like, how do I win? And I know their 3 moves. So my world is like, how do my 3 moves outweigh their moves? Or how do I defend that thing? But the crazy part is somebody might train for 4 years to beat that person just to lose to one of the 3 moves that you know that they excel at because they freaking crush it and it's what they're going to win with and you know it and you're going to lose to somebody because they're better than you with their 3 moves.
Yeah.
And so it's like if you can identify what are those 3 moves for you, excel at it in your career and then start to figure out how to leverage your team and become more collaborative, that's how you excel in the long run.
Yeah.
I'm a really big believer in that.
Nxt In.